Throughout its history, the dungeon has always been a major part of the game that we call Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, it's right there in the name, right? Dungeons and Dragons. Gygax and Arneson could have called this game High Fantasy Adventures, Dragon Heroes, or Dragon Adventures, or on, but they didn't. They called it Dungeons and Dragons. The term Dungeon Master was equally important to the company, so much so that TSR trademarked the phrase in 1992, and Wizards of the Coast still holds it as an active trademark today. Other games might use Game Master or Storyteller or something similar, but only Dungeons and Dragons can use Dungeon Master. And while many games since have desperately tried to capture that magic that is the dungeon in D&D's fantasy worlds like Darkest Dungeon or my beloved Diablo series, the things that make a dungeon in D&D so special that it can't quite be replicated is the topic for today. Because not all dungeons are created equal, but I want to talk about some of the things you absolutely should include if you want to make a great dungeon that your players will remember forever. The first thing every great dungeon has is a tremendous sense of unease to it. This is probably the most important key to creating an evocative and unforgettable dungeon for your group of players to delve down into the depths of. A great dungeon should never allow your players to feel comfortable. The entire time they should feel like, we shouldn't be here. To create this haunting tone for the dungeon, you can typically approach this in two ways, either with the dungeon being the main source of discomfort or the thing. The dungeon is the standard Indiana Jones affair. It's the loose tile that triggers poisoned arrows. It's the funhouse full of mirrors and deadly surprises. It's the Triwizard Tournament maze that bends and twists and wraps you up in choking vines. Or you could go the route of the unknown, dangerous thing that continues to hunt you down. This is the typical Minotaur prowling the maze with the bloody cleaver, the alien crawling along the spaceship's air ducts, Stephen King's Pennywise, or the ghosts inside the haunted mansion, there and then gone, and then there again off in the distance. Regardless of which you choose, you should always take a moment and consider, what is it about your dungeon that makes it such a terrifying place? What is it about this place that keeps most sane people far away, with only the bravest and most daring adventurers able to even cross into its threshold? Is it simply the place itself, or is it what lurks there? Perhaps it's even both. The second thing every great dungeon has is a meaningful choice. This choice can take many shapes and forms, but truly magnificent dungeons always present their challengers with some form of meaningful choice that will impact their journey and even path inside of this insidious place. When you are designing a dungeon, there is a basic trap, pun fully intended, that dungeon masters fall into. They fall in love with every room, and they want their players to ultimately face all the traps and puzzles and riddles that they've come up with. The dungeon master has taken the time to put together these challenges, and that's not always a simple or easy task. It's time consuming. And so they want to see their players face those challenges, go figure. But a great dungeon is not a closed loop system. Great dungeons are filled with secrets and have meaningful choices. Consider Tolkien for a moment. In the Mines of Moria, the party completely stops to weigh which direction they should go. This has a profound impact on the events that eventually take place in the belly of the mountain. In The Hobbit, we get probably the greatest example of this. The One Ring is only found because Bilbo ventures into Gollum's lair. Sure, in both the book and in the movie, this is a little bit more by happenstance than by meaningful choice by the character. But there is something to be said about the design and layout of the Goblin Cave, that it has these additional optional areas to explore. And those are concepts that great dungeons play off of. Secret areas and optional paths. Great dungeons should feel like a twisting, sprawling maze. Remember our first tip about creating that sense of unease. We don't want to create a haunted house ride that has a clear and defined path without it having any meaningful choices to make. We want our players second guessing themselves. We want them paranoid and dreading that they've made a wrong turn 3 and 4 and 5 rooms later. And when and if they do ultimately survive, they'll feel that much more accomplished, that they made those right choices. And if they don't, they'll relive that choice over and over again and think back on it for years to come. Rule number 3 is that all great dungeons have the promise of an incredible treasure. These adventures are risking quite literally life and limb, and so the prize for braving the notorious dungeon should be equally astounding. But here's the catch. The dungeon's treasure doesn't always have to quite literally be a hoard of gold, though that is perfectly acceptable. You can have it be a much looser interpretation. Perhaps the treasure is a single genie lamp at the end of the Cave of Wonders. Or maybe the treasure is the restoring of the soul of the woman you love to the mortal realm. Maybe it's the lifting of a curse that's plagued you for years. Or even, and I would be a little careful with this one, the treasure is nothing more than an empty scroll case. Or in essence, a false treasure over-exaggerated throughout the years. Also, in cases where you have decided to use the thing as the major threat to the characters and sense of unease, you can absolutely still include a great treasure as part of your dungeon. Basically, if you want your players to go to the dungeon willingly, that's when your dungeon should have a great treasure. If you want to drop them into the dungeon, much like the intro to Out of the Abyss, then the treasure becomes freedom. Basically, the treasure is, will they survive and escape? A great example of this motif is the movie The Cube. The fourth thing every great dungeon has is a social encounter. Do not underestimate the importance of a social encounter during your player's crawl through a nefariously deadly dungeon. The social encounter, as much as anything you will include or design in this dungeon, will set the tone for the entire experience. What makes the Company of 14's experience in the Goblin Cave so memorable? It's because Bilbo meets Gollum. That part of the book was simply captivating, not only to us as the reader, but also to the character. Fast forward the clock to the other events in the story of The Hobbit and ask yourself, what's more memorable? The Battle of the Five Armies? Or when Bilbo encounters Smaug? It's Smaug by a mile. The same can be said of any great dungeon. Even the infamous Tomb of Horrors has a distinctive social encounter that I'll leave at that for spoiler reasons for those who haven't actually played all the way through it and would still like to. If you are looking for inspiration, here are a couple of ideas to get the wheels spinning. The first is with one of my favorite creatures in all of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, the Nothic. In short, the Nothic is a wonderful monster out of the original Monster Manual, Amazon affiliate link down in the video's description, thank you, that is basically a cursed wizard or arcane scholar. They are drawn to places with mysterious magical properties and are perfect social encounters for literally any dungeon. They're also a lower CR, so higher level groups can easily dispatch them if they wish, so there is plenty of room for morally gray choices depending on how the social encounter ultimately develops. Option 2 is the ghost or spirit. This is another easy to use trope that your players will love. I'm particularly fond of the trapped in time trope, where the soul is unaware of their current circumstance. The single best example I've seen of this is from Matt Click's first Provoker series, when the party happens upon a ghost of an adventurer who died from a riddled trap. The ghost was pacing back and forth, repeating the riddle to themselves, trapped in the afterlife in a cycle of still trying to solve that very riddle that ultimately got them killed. The players assisted the ghost, freeing it from its torment, and it made for a powerful social encounter that breathed the sense of life into the dungeon. And it reinforced to the players that the dungeon was in fact quite deadly. Which brings us to rule number 5. Truly great dungeons are, without a doubt, deadly. I don't feel like this needs to be expounded upon too much, but if your dungeon isn't capable of killing a character or 2 or 5, then it's not going to reach that truly epic dungeon status. Look back at the Fellowship of the Ring. More than halfway through the book and film, we've not had any real sense of danger outside of a few close encounters and Frodo getting stabbed twice, but ultimately pulling through. As the group delves into the mines of Moria, however, the stakes are raised with the appearance of the Balrog. For a brief moment, we believe, with Gandalf standing firm, ultimately, the party will be alright, creating a clever impasse with the Fiend. But as the depths of Moria claims Gandalf a few minutes later, it changes the tone of how we view the Fellowship's passage through the mountain. So it's perfectly okay to make your dungeon lethal. The reason Tomb of Horrors is so epic and has been elevated to epic legendary status is not because it's a cakewalk. The 6th thing your epic dungeon should have is A magical obstacle. This can be a doorway, a portal, a force field. It can be a bit of water that leaves the drinker in an insane and defenseless state, but ultimately must be consumed. It can be an invisible bridge from one side of the area to another over the black, bottomless chasm below. Or it can be an enchantment over a life-sized chessboard. Dungeons are the perfect opportunity for dungeon masters to express their own creativity. And it's one of the places we get a free pass to be as creative as we want, specifically with how magic works in our world. Constantly having our monsters use insane spells that we come up with that the players don't have access to feels unfair to them. However, the dungeon can have all sorts of weird spell effects and still feel totally fair with, well, magic did it. There's no spells in Dungeons & Dragons to create a life-size chessboard that flings you back off of it if you try to cheat the game. But your players won't second-guess exactly how that enchantment works with the listed spells in the PHB if they come across this magical obstacle in your dungeon. They'll just assume magic did it. And epic dungeons all have some form of magical obstacle that must be overcome. These are often looked back on as high points of a dungeon and can easily and quickly define them. And finally, our seventh and final thing every great dungeon has is an epic boss fight. The interesting thing about this is that the boss fight doesn't always have to come at the very end of the dungeon, though often that does make the most sense, right? I mean, the final guardian of the treasure wants as big of an advantage as possible, and hopefully the traps and deadly obstacles have weakened the party or even eliminated some of them before reaching the boss. But every great dungeon must have something that makes those players do a double take. Not only are we trying to create a great memorable encounter, but truthfully, not every player at every table in the world ever is going to really be into slow, cautious dungeon crawls with traps and riddles that some of the more eager players try and solve first. This, however, is their chance to shine, and you should absolutely give them that opportunity to do so. And the best dungeons, they don't just have a tough boss fight. They have an epic boss fight. So go big, go dangerous, go over the top. As scary as killing characters might seem, even if you do end up wiping the party, it'll be a game that they'll remember for years to come. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets has a runtime of 161 minutes. But when I mention the movie, most people immediately think about the enormous basilisk sliding out of the statue of Salazar Slytherin's gaping maw. But the basilisk was on screen less than 5 full minutes in an almost 3-hour movie. That's a great example of what creating an epic boss for your dungeon can do. Now, just for fun, I thought I'd throw in some additional fun and silly things you should think about putting in your dungeon. These are classics, but unlike the rest of this list, you can consider these optional, but still recommended. First off, we have moving floors. Moving floors, moving walls, shifting staircases, and sudden pits that drop you yet further down into the dungeon. These are wonderful tropes that a lot of great dungeons share in common, but again, not something I would consider maybe mandatory for epic dungeon status. After that, we have multi-layered puzzles. These are puzzles that might not be solved in the same room. I'm trying desperately to avoid spoilers here, but some of the most famous dungeons in the tabletop RPG world use these to great effect. Again, the key here is to take the answer and move into another area to find the riddle that it solves. A lot of escape rooms also use this trope frequently, and it's a great foreshadowing tool. The Stone Guardian. I've mentioned these bad boys in the past when talking about the Threshold Guardian, but wonderful, wonderful trope and very usable. What I like about this element is that the players see it coming a mile away, and trying to be clever about how they trigger it is part of the fun. And then we have a good history to your dungeon. This is something I always recommend taking a few seconds to mull over during the creation process, as it can actually help you write and design some of the areas in your dungeon. So if you think your dungeon was once created by a crazy wizard to test his 2 sons like a lunatic, then that already starts to help you get an idea on what your players might find within it. Conversely, if you think that a troglodyte band used the entrance for a few years before releasing something even fouler within, that again helps you make that dungeon that much more interesting. This is a bit of a double-edged sword though, because you can easily overthink it. And that's why I'm throwing this tip here at the end of the video. Spend time here so long as it is helping you. The moment it starts to bog you down, move on. Some players want this info, but a lot of them will skip it, and your prep time is valuable. So if it helps, do it. If it slows you down, just move on. Trust me. Okay, and now I want to pass it over to you guys in the community. What did I miss? Remember, we kind of have two parts of the video here. First off, did I miss anything in my list of like cornerstones of things that every dungeon must have? I don't think I did, but maybe I did. I don't know. Let's see what you guys come up with. And then secondly, are there any of those like optional tropes, right? Those little Scooby-Doo haunted mansion-y typey things where, you know, you have the spinning bookcase or something in that vein. I think I covered that with moving walls, but is there anything over there that was very obvious that I did not include in this video either? I, of course, want to give a massive shout out to all of my incredible patrons over at welcomeadventures.com. Guys, thank you. I know times have been a little slow on content lately, and you know, you guys have messaged me over there a lot of wonderful words of encouragement, and I really appreciate that. So huge thank you to all of my incredible patrons. If you guys like what I do here, you want to support more content like this and snag some rewards for yourself, welcomeadventures.com is a great way to help out the channel as we begin to pick back up in content. If this is your first time here and you love role-playing games as much as I do, or maybe you're learning to love role-playing games as much as I do, I would love to have you subscribe. I put out videos on GM tips, player tips, tutorials, and more just like this. So if this sounds like something you might be interested in, hit the subscribe button down below and come join us. Also, you can always jump in on the Taking 20 Discord, which again, link down below. Find a game, ask questions, get help. It's a wonderful community over there of thousands and thousands of people. So yeah, check out the Discord as well. Sorry, mods. Enjoy your new wave of people jumping in on the Discord server. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Cody, and may your games be filled with awesome memories and even better friends. I'll catch you guys next time. And happy birthday, Dad. I love you.
Yeah.